Garrett Caldwell had one rule he never broke in 12 years of running a billion-dollar company: never hire on instinct. That Monday morning, he walked into the boardroom, took his seat at the head of the interview table, and opened the last candidate's file. Then the door opened, and the woman who stepped inside was the same woman he had caught from falling on the sidewalk outside the sandwich shop exactly 3 hours earlier. She sat down across from him, folded her hands on the table, and looked at him directly. No embarrassment, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the morning at all. Garrett looked down at her name on the file, then back up at her. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he had no idea what to do with what he was feeling. Garrett Caldwell woke up at 5 every morning without an alarm, not because he was disciplined, though people who worked for him would have used that word, but because sleep past 5 felt like lost ground, and lost ground was something he had stopped tolerating a long time ago. He would make coffee in the kitchen while the rest of the house was still dark, stand at the counter with the mug in both hands, and give himself exactly 4 minutes before the day started. 4 minutes was enough. It had to be. He had been doing this alone for 5 years, since the hospital. Since the hallway outside room 314, where a doctor had said words that rearranged everything, and Garrett had stood there in his coat and his good shoes, and understood for the first time that there were things in this world that did not respond to effort or planning or money. He had driven home that night, walked into Theo's room, and watched his son sleep for a long time. Then he went back to the kitchen and made a decision, quiet, private, permanent, that from that point forward, he would only put his weight on things he could see and measure. Everything else was a liability. That was the framework he had built his life inside of. It had served him well. Caldwell Group had grown from a regional construction firm into the largest infrastructure developer on the East Coast. He had raised Theo without incident. He had kept the grief somewhere small and manageable, the way you contain a leak before it becomes structural damage. People mistook his stillness for confidence. He never corrected them. That Monday morning, he buckled Theo into the back seat at 7:15 and pulled out of the driveway in the dark, blue early light. Theo was 8 years old and had his mother's eyes and the habit of asking questions at the exact moment Garrett was not prepared to answer them. The drive to school took 14 minutes. For most of it, Theo sat with his backpack on his lap and watched the streets go by through the window, which Garrett appreciated. But then, Theo pressed his finger against the glass and said, "Dad, where did all the people go?" Garrett glanced over. On the right side of the road, the old East Side neighborhood was sealed off behind chain-link fencing and orange construction barriers. He could see the edge of a blue project sign through the fence, white letters, clean design. Caldwell East Corridor. His company's name on a board in front of someone else's demolished street. "They'll have better housing," Garrett said. "That's the whole point of the project." Theo was quiet for a moment, the way he got quiet when he was turning something over. Then he said, "But did they want to go?" Garrett did not answer. He took the turn onto Maple and watched the project site disappear in the rearview mirror. The question sat in the car with them the rest of the way to school, and Garrett let it sit there, and neither of them said anything else about it. He dropped Theo off at the curb, watched him push through the front doors, and then drove the 4 blocks to the sandwich shop on Creston Street, where he stopped every weekday morning. It was not a special place. The coffee was reliable. The line moved fast. The staff did not try to talk to him. That was all he needed from it. He parked, pulled out his phone, and was already working through his emails by the time he pushed open the door. He did not see her until he was already walking out. She came through the door at the same moment he was exiting, moving fast, head down a stack of folders, pressed against her chest with one arm, and a paper coffee cup balanced in the other hand. The collision was quiet, but complete. The coffee went sideways. The folders hit the sidewalk and burst open paper sliding in every direction across the concrete. She made a sound, not a word, just the sharp exhale of someone who had been holding something together all morning and had just watched it come apart. Garrett caught her by the elbow before she went down with the folders. She steadied, looked up at him, and for a second, neither of them moved. She had dark brown hair pulled back without much effort, and she was wearing a blazer that had been ironed at some point earlier that morning, though not recently. Her expression was the specific kind of controlled that people use when they are refusing to let a bad moment get worse. He bent down and started collecting the papers without being asked. She crouched on the other side and did the same, and for a moment, they were both just on the sidewalk, gathering her things off the ground. He caught the header on one of the pages before he handed the stack back to her bold, print-clean layout the words, Caldwell East Corridor, sitting at the top of the page above the words, Community Impact Assessment. He looked at it for one full second. Then he handed it back. She took the folder, stood, and said, "Thank you. I'm sorry, that was completely my fault." Her voice was even, composed in a way that suggested the composure was something she had practiced, not something that came naturally. Garrett said it was fine. She nodded, once adjusted the stack against her chest, and walked toward the parking lot. He watched her go for a moment, not long, just a moment, and then looked back down at his phone and finished walking to his car. By the time he started the engine, he had already moved on, or told himself he had. The interview was scheduled for 11. He had 3 meetings before it, and he ran through all 3 on time without deviation. His assistant had placed the candidate file on his desk before 9, and he had read it the way he read all personnel files, fast, systematic, looking for the 3 things that actually mattered: relevant experience, internal consistency, and any sign that the person was telling him a different story than the one on the page. Renata Cole, 36, a background in corporate communications with a specific emphasis on public-facing campaigns for infrastructure and urban development projects. The portfolio was strong, unusually strong for someone who had not come through one of the major firms. She had done independent consulting work on 2 large-scale urban redevelopment projects, one in Portland, one in Baltimore, both of which had faced significant community resistance before completion. He noted that. Set the file aside, walked into the boardroom at 11 o'clock. She was already seated when he came in, the same folders from the sidewalk stacked neatly in front of her, her hands folded on top of them. She saw him the moment he came through the door. Something moved across her face, a fraction of recognition, or maybe the flicker of someone deciding quickly how to handle something. Then it was gone, and she was composed again, watching him take his seat at the head of the table. The other 2 members of the hiring panel settled in beside him. Garrett opened his copy of the file, smoothed the page, and looked up. She was still looking at him, not with expectation, not with nerves, with the particular stillness of someone who had decided before they walked into the room exactly how much they were willing to show. "Ms. Cole," he said, "let's get started." She nodded, and the interview began, but something in the room had already shifted in a way that Garrett could not quantify, and he spent the next 40 minutes aware of it, the way you stay aware of a sound you can't locate present at the edge of everything refusing to resolve. Renata Cole got the job because she was the best candidate. Garrett told himself that clearly once the morning after the panel had unanimously signed off, and then he moved on. He was good at moving on. The offer letter went out through HR. She accepted within the hour, and by the following Monday, she was at the desk his assistant had assigned her on the executive floor 3rd window, from the left, visible from the hallway that ran past his office. He noticed that on the first day, and then deliberately stopped noticing it. She worked hard, and she worked quietly. She did not introduce herself to people so much as let them introduce themselves to her. She asked precise questions in meetings and said nothing when she did not have something precise to say. The rest of the communications team seemed to respect her almost immediately, the way people respect someone who does not waste their time. Garrett observed this from a distance and told himself it was professional assessment. It was the kind of thing a CEO paid attention to. It had nothing to do with anything else. What he could not explain and chose not to examine too closely was the way he had started registering her movements in his peripheral vision. Not watching, just aware. The same awareness he had for anything that did not behave exactly as expected, a figure in a spreadsheet that didn't track a structural report with a number that sat slightly wrong. Renata Cole was professional competent and completely appropriate in every interaction, and yet something about the way she moved through the office contained purposeful, always, with the air of someone who knew more than she was saying, kept snagging his attention in ways he could not file away. He walked past her desk one afternoon in the middle of her second week and caught a glimpse of her screen. She had a city zoning map pulled up the East Side corridor, the redevelopment boundary drawn in red. She saw him stop, and her hand moved to the mouse, the screen switching to a spreadsheet before he had fully processed what he'd seen. She looked up at him with her usual expression. Calm, professional waiting. Garrett said nothing. He continued down the hallway to his office, but he remembered it. The quarterly communications review was scheduled for a Thursday evening in the 6th week after she joined. Most of the senior team had cleared out by 7. Garrett had stayed for a budget call that ran long, and when he finally walked down to the conference room, he found Renata still there, setting up for her presentation alone. She had her laptop connected to the screen, her folders open a notepad with handwritten points along the margin. She looked up when he came in. "I can come back," he said. "I'm ready now," she said. So he sat down and she presented. The first half was thorough and clean campaign metrics, brand consistency analysis, recommendations for the upcoming quarter. He had seen dozens of communication strategies in his career, and this one was built better than most. She knew how to structure an argument. She knew which numbers to lead with and which to hold back. He found himself leaning forward slightly, which was not something he typically did in these rooms. Then she clicked to a new slide and stopped. She set down the small remote she'd been holding, crossed her arms loosely, and looked at the slide for a moment before she looked at him. "I want to say something that's outside the scope of this presentation," she said. "And I want to say it directly, because I think that's the only way it's useful." Garrett said nothing. He waited. "The way this company is positioning your personal brand is wrong," Renata said. "Not ineffective, wrong. Every campaign for the last 3 years has been building the same image. Decisive, visionary. The man who builds cities. And it's technically accurate, and it's completely hollow. And that's why the initiative last year didn't land the way you needed it to." She kept her eyes on him, steady, not aggressive, the way someone looks when they're saying something they've thought about for a long time and are finally willing to say out loud. People don't connect with infrastructure. They connect with people. Right now, the public sees the CEO of Caldwell Group. Nobody sees the man who drives his kid to school every morning. The room was quiet. Outside the windows, the city held its usual noise. At a distance, traffic, a siren somewhere below the low hum of the building's ventilation. Inside, it was just the two of them, and that sentence, which was still settling. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. "You think that's what they need to see? I think that's what's real," Renata said, "and people can tell the difference." He did not respond right away. He picked up his pen and turned it once in his fingers, the way he did when he was thinking something through, that he didn't want to think through too fast. The campaign she was describing, the one she was criticizing, had been approved by his full communications team and 2 outside consultants. No one had said what she just said. Not one person. He wasn't sure if that meant she was wrong or if it meant something else. Something that had to do with the distance between him and everyone who worked for him. "Finish the presentation," he said. She picked up the remote and moved to the next slide. But the shape of the evening had changed, and they both knew it. After that Thursday, Something shifted in the texture of their interactions, not dramatically, not in any way that either of them would have named out loud, but enough that Garrett felt it. She still kept her professional distance. She still ended every conversation at exactly the right moment, never let anything drift into personal territory, always left rooms on time. But there was a different quality to it now, less like natural reserve and more like deliberate containment. The distinction mattered to him in a way he couldn't fully articulate. He started finding reasons to consult her outside the normal workflow. Not manufacturing situations, just choosing to route certain questions through her rather than around her. He told himself it was because her judgment was good, which was true. But he also knew in the honest part of himself that he did not often visit, that he wanted to see how she handled proximity. She handled it the same way she handled everything precisely without waste, giving him exactly what the situation called for, and nothing more. 3 weeks after the Thursday presentation on a Wednesday afternoon, Theo came to the office. It was not unusual. Garrett's assistant picked Theo up from school twice a week on days when aftercare fell through, and the boy had been coming to the office since he was small enough to fall asleep on the couch in the corner of Garrett's office. He was comfortable there. He knew where the good snacks were and which assistants would play cards with him and how to be quiet when quiet was needed. He was a perceptive kid. He had learned early how to read the temperature of a room. That Wednesday, Theo came down the hallway with his backpack dragging off one shoulder and almost walked past Renata's desk before something made him stop. She was on the phone speaking in a low voice, and she glanced up at him as he slowed down. She held up one finger, the universal signal, for one moment, and he stood there and waited with the particular patience of a child who had spent a lot of time in adult spaces. When she hung up, she turned to face him fully, which most adults in that building did not do. They would half turn, give him a distracted smile, keep one eye on their screen. Renata turned her chair all the way and looked at him like he was worth looking at. "You must be Theo," she said. "How do you know my name?" he asked. "Your picture's on your dad's desk," she said. "You look exactly like it." Theo considered this. "Are you the one who does the talking for the company?" "Something like that." "That seems like a hard job," he said with the particular seriousness of an 8-year-old who had decided the conversation was worth having. "Because what if the company does something and you don't think it's right? Do you still have to talk about it like it's good?" Renata's expression shifted just slightly, a movement in the eyes, something internal registering before she caught it. "That's a really good question," she said. "The answer is that a good communications person tries to make sure the company does the right thing first, so there's nothing hard to explain afterward." Theo seemed to accept this. He adjusted his backpack. Then he said, "Do you know the East Side? My dad's company is building something there." Renata's hands were resting on the edge of her desk. She looked at Theo for a moment, with an expression that Garrett, standing in the hallway, just out of her sightline, could not fully read. Then she said, "I know it." "My dad said the people there will get better houses," Theo said. "But I don't know if they wanted to move." Renata did not look toward the hallway. She kept her eyes on Theo. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "people don't always get asked." Garrett stood very still in the hallway. He had arrived quietly 2 minutes earlier, had been about to come around the corner, and had stopped when he heard Theo's voice, not to eavesdrop, just to not interrupt something that seemed to be going fine on its own. Now he stayed still for a different reason. He was looking at the side of Renata's face and thinking about the zoning map on her screen 3 weeks ago, and the way she'd switched tabs when she saw him stop, and the particular care with which she had just chosen every word she said to his son. Something was adding up. He wasn't sure yet what it totaled. He came around the corner, and Theo looked up and said, "Dad, did you know Renata knows the East Side?" "I heard," Garrett said. He looked at Renata. She looked back at him, composed as always, but there was something behind it now that he hadn't seen before. Not guilt. Something more like waiting. like she had been waiting for a long time for the distance between them to close, and now that it was closing, she wasn't sure what to do with it. "Thanks for keeping him company," Garrett said. "He kept himself company," Renata said. "I just answered his questions." Garrett walked Theo back toward his office with one hand on the boy's shoulder. He did not look back, but he was thinking about what she'd said to Theo sometimes. People don't always get asked, and the way she had said it. Not like a general observation, like something specific, like something she knew from the inside. 2 days later, he was working late when his email pulled in a forwarded thread from HR sent to him by mistake, the kind of routing error that happened occasionally with large distribution lists. It was an internal exchange about the hiring process for Renata's position, mostly administrative. He was about to close it when a line in the middle of the thread caught his eye. A note from the recruiter, dated the week before Renata's interview candidate declined 3 competing offers, including 2 at significantly higher compensation. Reason provided on intake form, interested in the East Corridor project, specifically. Garrett read the line again. Then he set his phone face down on the desk and sat with that for a while. The sandwich shop, the folders on the sidewalk, the header on the page he had handed back to her without asking about, the zoning map she had switched away from, the care she had taken with every answer, the way she had been from the very first moment in the interview room, already decided about something. He had assumed that was confidence. He was no longer sure that was the right word. He picked up his phone and typed a message to his assistant. "Ask Renata Cole to come to my office when she gets in tomorrow morning." He sent it. Then he sat back in his chair and looked out the window at the city and tried to figure out which part of what he was feeling was professional and which part was something else entirely. He could not cleanly separate them. That more than anything was what unsettled him. She came in at 8:15, which was earlier than her usual time. Garrett was already at his desk when his assistant showed her in, and he noticed that she had dressed the same way she always did, blazer dark slacks, hair pulled back, but something in her posture was different. She sat down across from him and put nothing on the table between them. No folders, no notepad. Just her hands loose in her lap and the particular stillness of someone who had spent the night deciding to stop performing. Garrett turned his laptop to face her. The HR email thread was open, the recruiter's note visible in the middle of the screen. He did not say anything. He just let her read it. She read it. Then she looked up at him, and her expression did not collapse into apology or scramble toward explanation. She held his gaze and said, "Okay. That's all," he said. "You want me to explain," she said. "I will. But I want you to know first that everything in my portfolio is real. Every result, every campaign, every reference. I didn't misrepresent anything about my work." "That's not what I asked," Garrett said. Renata looked at him steadily. "I grew up on the east side," she said. "The block on Delaney Street, 4 houses in from the corner. My mother still lives there. Her house is inside the demolition boundary for the East Corridor project." She said it plainly without drama, the way someone states a fact they have held for a long time and no longer need to protect. "I didn't come here to sabotage anything. I came here because I'm the only person I know who has both the professional background and an actual reason to care about what happens to that neighborhood. I knew if I applied and listed that as my reason, I would never get past the first screen. So I led with the work. I proved I was useful, and I waited for the right moment." The office was quiet. Down the hallway, Garrett could hear the faint sound of the building coming to life. Phones, footsteps, the elevator opening and closing. In the room, there was just the 2 of them, and what she had said, which was sitting between them like something solid. Garrett stood up from his desk. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her for a moment, looking out at the city. He was not angry. He had expected to be angry, had prepared for it the night before, had rehearsed the version of this conversation in which he was the wronged party, in which he had been manipulated by someone he had extended trust to. But standing here now, he found that the anger was not what had arrived. What had arrived was something closer to recognition. He thought about Theo's question from that morning in the car. He thought about his son pressing his finger against the car window and asking where the people had gone. He thought about the way he had not answered. He turned back around. "You should have told me," he said. "Yes," Renata said. "I should have. I made a calculation. I'm not sure it was the right one." "It wasn't," he said. She did not argue with that. She sat with it, her hands still in her lap, and did not try to soften what she had done or explain it away. That was the thing that stopped him from saying the rest of what he had prepared. She was not performing contrition. She was just being honest, maybe for the first time since she had walked into the interview room, and it cost her something to do it. He could see that. "You can let me go right now," she said. "I'll clean out my desk this morning, but the project will still be wrong whether I'm here or not. That doesn't change." Garrett looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Go back to your desk. Don't go anywhere." She left. He stood in the middle of his office and did not move for a while. That evening he came home to find Theo at the kitchen table with a sheet of paper and a box of colored pencils. The boy was bent over the page with the focused silence he reserved for things he considered important. Garrett set his bag down and came around to look. Theo had drawn a street narrow with wide trees on both sides, the roots buckling the sidewalk. Small houses set close together with front porches and potted plants in the windows. At the bottom of the page, in careful block letters, Theo had written the words, "The street near school." Garrett stood behind his son and looked at that drawing for a long time. It was Delaney Street, unmistakably in every detail, the way the roots lifted the concrete, the particular angle of the porches, the shape of the corner lot. Theo had seen it through the car window on the way to school. Every morning had filed it away the way children file away the things that matter to them, and had sat down tonight and put it on paper without needing to know its name. The trees, the porches, the details of a place that, on the current project timeline, would not exist in its present form by the end of the following year. He put his hand on Theo's shoulder. The boy looked up. "Is it good?" Theo asked. "It's good," Garrett said. He put Theo to bed at 9, and then he went back to the kitchen and opened his laptop and pulled up the full East Corridor project file. Not the summary, not the executive briefing, but the complete documentation. The environmental assessments, the community consultation records, the displacement projections, the phase timeline. He read it the way he had not read it the first time. Not as a CEO approving a budget, as a person trying to understand what was actually happening. He read for 2 hours. By the time he closed the laptop, the coffee in his mug had gone cold, and he had 3 pages of handwritten notes and a clear, uncomfortable picture of what Renata had known when she walked into his building. The consultation records were thin. One public meeting held on a Tuesday afternoon in a community center that required 2 bus transfers to reach with a notice period of 9 days. 11 residents had attended. The displacement projection covered 640 families. The document noted this without apparent concern. Garrett had signed off on this file 14 months ago. He had read it then. He had not read it the way he was reading it now, because no one had given him a reason to. He came into the office the next morning before 7. He called Renata in at 7:30 before the floor filled up, and when she came through the door, he had the project file open on the table between them. "I need you to show me what a real community engagement plan looks like for this project," he said. "Not a revision of what we have, from the beginning." Renata sat down across from him and looked at the file, then at him. She was checking something, reading his face the way she had read rooms, carefully looking for the catch. When she didn't find one, something in her expression settled. "That's going to require pushing the Phase 1 timeline," she said. "I know," he said. "The board won't like it." "I know that too," he said. "Show me anyway." She opened her laptop. He pulled his chair around to her side of the table and they worked. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, building something that looked nothing like the existing plan, a process that started with listening, that mapped the actual concerns of the people on Delaney Street and the surrounding blocks, that treated the community not as a variable to be managed, but as a constituency with standing. It was slower. It was more expensive in the short term. It was, Garrett could see clearly by the time they were halfway through, the right way to do it. At 4 o'clock the next afternoon, he called a full project board meeting. The room had 12 people in it, project directors, legal finance, 2 external partners who had significant capital tied to the current timeline. Garrett stood at the head of the table and said, "We're restructuring the community engagement phase of East Corridor. Renata Cole is going to walk you through the revised approach." The objection started before Renata had finished the first section of her presentation. The timeline, the additional cost, the contractual implications with the city. One of the external partners leaned forward and said, with the careful tone of someone who was actually quite angry, that this kind of reversal this late in the process was not how Garrett Caldwell had built his company. Garrett let the room run for a moment. Then he said, "You're right. It isn't how I've done it before." He looked around the table. "We're doing it this way now. This is not a proposal." He looked at Renata and nodded once. "Keep going." She kept going. The room did not become warm or enthusiastic. These were not people who changed direction easily, but the objections became procedural rather than fundamental, which was the only kind of objection Garrett needed to work with. By the end of the meeting, they had a revised framework and a new timeline, and a list of next steps that would begin the following Monday. Garrett walked out of the boardroom without looking back, and did not let himself feel the weight of what had just happened until he was in the elevator alone going down. 1 month later, the East Corridor Project held its first open community meeting on a Saturday morning in the gymnasium of the elementary school on Delaney Street. The turnout was larger than anyone on the project team had projected. People came with questions, with complaints, with hand-drawn maps of their blocks and photographs of their houses. They came because someone had knocked on their doors and told them their input would change something. Garrett stood at the side of the room and watched Renata move through the crowd, not managing it, not performing for it, but actually in it, stopping at each table, listening the way someone listens when they already know the stakes. At one point, he saw her stop beside an older woman near the back wall. The woman was small, with white hair, and the careful posture of someone who had dressed up for this. Renata leaned down and said something close to her ear, and the woman put her hand over Renata's and held it for a moment. Garrett understood without needing to be told. He looked away, not because the moment was uncomfortable, but because it was private, and some things deserved to stay that way. The meeting ran 2.5 hours over schedule. By the time the room had cleared and the folding chairs were being stacked, it was late afternoon, the gym filling with the low amber light of a day running out. Garrett found himself walking out to the parking lot at the same time as Renata, both of them quiet in the easy way of people who have been in the same room for a long time and no longer need to fill the space between them with words. They reached the edge of the lot and slowed without either of them deciding to slow. The evening was cool, still light, the kind of October afternoon that is warm enough to stand in if you are not in a hurry. Garrett looked out at the street, at the trees, with their roots lifting the sidewalk, the porches, the small houses that looked exactly the way his son had drawn them, and then he looked at Renata. "Are you hungry?" he said. His voice had none of its boardroom register in it. It was just a voice. "Not a company thing, just dinner." Renata turned to look at him. Something in her face that had been carefully arranged for weeks was no longer arranged in quite the same way. She looked at him the way she had looked at her mother in that gymnasium, without any professional distance between the looking and the feeling. "Will Theo be there?" she said. Garrett felt something loosen in his chest, a thing that had been held tightly for long enough that he had stopped noticing it was held. "If you don't mind," he said. "I don't mind," she said. They stood there for another moment in the October light, not moving, yet not needing to. Garrett Caldwell had built his life on the principle that nothing meant anything unless you could measure it. He was standing in a parking lot on Delaney Street, next to a woman who had walked into his building with a hidden agenda and ended up showing him something true, and the only thing he was certain of was that he wasn't ready for this evening to be over. He could not put a number on that. He found for the first time in a very long time that he did not need to.